You may have heard the saying go, pride comes before a fall. It's a much quoted proverb taken from Solomon's 3,000-year-old book of Proverbs. But I think this proverb is getting somewhat lost in our current culture. For many, life has become more about the quest for greatness, for wealth, for respect, for significance, for fame, for popularity, for having to be seen to be right, for being viewed as an authority on something. Liverpool Football Club became champions of England earlier this week, 30 years after their last title win. The manager, Jurgen Klopp, who is a professing Christian, was interviewed by a TV reporter, and he said something quite remarkable. He said, "We won some stuff, but they, as in the players, are still humble, and as long as they stay humble, we have a chance of being successful." I think it's fair to say that humility is not a virtue that is top of most people's list. But to be fair, Jesus' disciples struggled with this too. They argued about which one of them was the greatest. Jesus' response was, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. Jesus lived this humility throughout his life, and especially in his death. He died for sinners who had turned their back on his Father. Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve. Over the past couple of months, we've been working our way through the book of Habakkuk. It started with Habakkuk asking God why he was enduring his own nation of Judah's rebellion. God responded by saying that they would receive his judgment by the hand of the Chaldeans, who's otherwise termed the Babylonians. Habakkuk is confused at why God would use a more wicked nation to discipline a less wicked one, but trusted that God would answer him. Last time he read that God would judge the Babylonians in his own good time, and today we pick up with him giving a scathing rebuke of them. He scoffs at them. He mocks and taunts their overconfident, false sense of security. The taunters are now becoming the taunted. The so-called superpower is being humiliated. In the passage we are going to be looking at, God contrasts a wicked, prideful, self-reliant people with a people of faith who rely not on themselves but on God. Babylon were the very epitome of a bully nation, as we will soon see. On the night that Babylon fell to the Persians, their leaders were reveling in their own greatness, drinking wine from the cups that they plundered from the temple in Jerusalem. Bear that in mind as we read the text today. God launches 5 taunts that expose their wickedness and folly, and then alludes to what will result from it. Firstly, God says the plunderer will be plundered, verses 6 to 8. Woe to him who heaps up what is not his own. For how long? And loads himself with pledges. Will not your debtors suddenly arise, and those awake who will make you tremble? Then you will be spoil for them, because you have plundered many nations. All the remnants of the people shall plunder you, for the blood of man and violence to the earth, to cities, and to all who dwell in them. Palmer Robertson points out that the word woe used here at the beginning of the 5 sections we're going to look at would perhaps be better translated ha. So ha to him who heaps up what is not his own, for how long? The sin in view here is the unjust acquisition of wealth through plunder and extortion. Now the important word in this sentence is the word unjust, as there is absolutely nothing wrong with making money and gaining wealth. In fact, Jesus' parable of the talents, recorded in Matthew 25, teaches us that we should be productive and fruitful in our work. But we should not acquire wealth unjustly, that is, at the expense of others. In other words, we shouldn't trample on others to accumulate more wealth, either by taking their money or their stuff, or by taking advantage of their indebtedness to us through demanding extortionately high rates of interest. The Babylonians were widely known for plundering their captives and taking advantage of them by taxing them heavily and issuing loans with such high amounts of interest as to keep them indebted, sometimes even into slavery. They were obsessed with the accumulation of wealth. It could be said that they became enslaved to it. This can be a danger for us today in our materialistic, wealth-driven society. For many of us, our identity, our value is found in how much money we have. The oracle is realized in the Persians who would one day plunder their plunderers. Secondly, God taunts their false sense of security. In verse 9 to 11, he says, "Woe to him who gets evil gain for his house, to set his nest on high, to be safe from the reach of harm. You have devised shame for your house by cutting off many peoples. You have fortified your life. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the woodwork respond." The word house here is relating to the Babylonian dynasty or legacy, if you like, rather than the home of an individual family. The Chaldeans or the Babylonians are seeking to build an impenetrable empire at all costs, to make themselves so secure that they are untouchable. This reveals the Babylonians' motive for accumulating wealth. They wanted security, they wanted comfort, they wanted a dynasty that went on and on and on. But the so-called impenetrable kingdom will be penetrated. And they had sought destruction on other nations. So as they had sought destruction on other nations, they were destined to one day experience it themselves. We think that our age will go on forever, much as the Babylonians thought their dynasty would go on forever. The truth is that throughout history, kingdoms and empires have arisen and eventually been toppled. At the beginning of the last century, the British Empire consisted of nearly a quarter of the world's population. But during the preceding decades, it steadily declined. I grew up in Carlisle and so visited a few times the ruined remains of Hadrian's Wall, which sits as a reminder of the once thought impenetrable Roman Empire. But there is a kingdom that will not perish. In fact, it is an eternal kingdom, and that is God's kingdom, the kingdom ruled by Jesus. And as Christians, our first allegiance is to this kingdom, not to the nation in which we were born into. Our citizenship is in heaven, as Paul in his letter to the church in Philippi reminds us. Jesus he started God's kingdom when he came, and after his ascension, he was crowned by his Father and declared King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We need to be kingdom-minded, but not earthly kingdom-minded, but heavenly kingdom-minded. In the Gospel according to Matthew, Jesus tells us to not lay up for ourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but rather to lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Like me, you may have a few family heirlooms in your home. I have an old family Bible that dates back to the beginning of the 19th century. But time has aged it. I'm looking to get it restored, but I know this will only delay the decaying process. The truth is that all our materials and possessions are decaying, and they will one day perish if they are not taken from us first. Instead, we are to prepare our souls for heaven by treasuring what Christ teaches us is important, valuing our character more than our stuff. Thirdly, God said, "Ha, your efforts are for nothing." Verses 12 to 14. Woe to him who builds a town with blood and founds a city on iniquity. Behold, it is not from the Lord of hosts that peoples labour merely for fire, and nations weary themselves for nothing. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Ha! To those who think that he can build a city on bloodshed and wickedness and get away with it. Your work is for nothing and will go up in flames. This is what God is saying here. building up a nation or living a life with the primary purpose of proudly showing your power and dominance to the world is ultimately futile and pointless, as it will ultimately come to nothing. Life for many of us can seem meaningless. Is there any point to my toil in life, we may ask? The humanists can provide no solid answer, as according to Richard Dawkins, we are just the product of mindless, unguided, natural, evolutionary processes. But God created us for his glory. This means that he created us with a purpose, that there is a central meaning to our life. There is a point to our lives. And it's not to make ourselves and our children's lives comfortable and secure. It's not about getting glory and honour for ourselves, but rather it is to live in such a way that brings glory to God and his Son. It is possible to waste our lives in pursuing the wrong things and filling our time and minds with stuff that have no eternal purpose. As John Piper says, only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. A time will one day come when the chaotic kingdoms of this world will be replaced with the peace and tranquility of a new kingdom, where all the earth will know and experience the glory of the King. Fourthly, God says, "Ha! You who humiliated others will be humiliated yourself." Verses 15 to 17. Woe to him who makes his neighbours drink. You pour out your wrath and make them drunk, in order to gaze at their nakedness. You will have your fill of shame instead of glory. Drink yourself and show your uncircumcision. The cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter shame will come upon your glory. The violence done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, as will the destruction of the beasts that terrified them. For the blood of man and violence to the earth, to cities and all who dwell in them. Ha, he says, to him who bullies, humiliates and shames others. The Babylonians would get their captives drunk and laugh at their inebriation and nakedness for their own pleasure and sense of superiority. Shame on you, God was saying. You yourselves will be shamed rather than glorified. Your shaming will come around to bite you. Bullying is a problem at a global, national, community and individual level. We have all seen bullying and many of us have likely experienced it. It should sicken us to see people humiliated for the pleasure of others, particularly those who are most vulnerable in our society. But so often our culture can take satisfaction at the humiliation of others. Whether it's the humiliating initiation rituals devised purely for the entertainment of the existing members of clubs, or the producers of TV talent shows that choose to show excruciating performances of people who clearly have no talent in what they're performing, purely for the entertainment of others. Or the newspapers, magazines and TV shows that love to raise people up, but equally seem to like to shame, humiliate and bring them down. It sometimes looks from the outside anyway like it's all a bit of a cruel game. And then there's the racial bullying of George Floyd that led to his death, which was an extreme abuse of power by a man who was supposed to be fulfilling a role of service. But what if it were different? Imagine a world where we truly sought to be humble, where we thought less of ourselves and more of others, where we sought to encourage and build others up rather than bring them low, that we sought to sacrifice our status for the sake of others. Crucifixion was the most humiliating mode of capital punishment, a punishment that the Romans did not even impose upon their own citizens. Our Lord was mocked by the soldiers who held him. They stripped him naked, beat him to an inch of his life, placed a scarlet robe on him and pressed a crown of thorns on his head. They bowed before him in mockery, crying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" He was made to carry his cross and was hung on it in public view, probably naked, whilst his foes watched on, mocking his apparent powerlessness. You who destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. He saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. Were their shouts. Oh, the irony of these cries. Christ conquered sin in his humiliation on the cross. He died so that we wouldn't have to. He experienced the judgment of God so that we wouldn't have to. He was shamed so that we could avoid being shamed before God. Finally, God says to the Babylonians, "Ha! You worship lifeless, powerless idols." Verses 18 to 20. What profit is in an idol when its maker has shaped it? A metal image, a teacher of lies. For its maker trusts in his own creation when he makes speechless idols. Woe to him who says to a wooden thing, "Awake," to a silent stone, "Arise." Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath in it at all. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before him. God is saying what I hope we would see as being obvious, that there is absolutely no benefit to be had from fashioning an idol out of metal, wood, or stone. Idols are not able to speak, let alone teach us any truth. In fact, worship of them leads into error, in that we accept a false view of God. It's ridiculous for us to think otherwise, as there's no life in them, and we have no power in us to make them come to life. However, like the Babylonians, we still worship created things today, in the sense that we chase after things in the quest of ultimate contentment. For some it may be wealth or intellect or sex or a relationship, perhaps good looks or power or influence, or maybe fame or even children. But it's an act of rebellion and stupidity to ignore our Creator, to think that we can box God in, that we can control him so that he would affirm who we think we are, rather than who he made us to be. God is not made in our image. We are made in his. Who are we to pontificate about what God is like based on our opinions? My opinions about God, let alone about meaning and purpose, are meaningless unless they are influenced and reflect the God who has revealed himself. God is not silent about who he is. He has revealed himself in his word. The Enlightenment, which began at the end of the 17th century, was built upon the pride of human intellect. It has led to the challenge that God is no longer required to explain the big questions of life. The belief that there is a creator behind the universe is seen as antiquated, a nice thought, but an unnecessary one. The theory of evolution has been used to disregard the need for God as creator, the idea being that everything can be explained solely through science. But mathematician John Lennox counters that by saying men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. We can pontificate as much as we like, but God is the giver of life, and we would be wise to remain silent and listen to his revelation. So don't pridefully trust in your own intellect, but humble yourself before him. Seek to live for his glory rather than your own. Otherwise, like the Babylonians found out, it won't end well for you. Because remember, pride comes before a fall.